The boy had not spoken in 41 days. Administrator Valrin so stood in the corridor outside the prince's quarters on the 14th level of Tessara Palace and reviewed the morning's staffing report on his data glass, while the silence from behind the carved crystal doors pressed against his awareness like an ache he could not locate. 41 days since Prince Caliph had stopped speaking. 41 days since the heir to the Tessaran sovereignty, a boy of 11 solar cycles, pale-skinned and luminous-eyed, and quiet even before the silence had simply closed his mouth and refused to open it again. Valrin tapped the report closed. 23 attendants had been assigned to the prince's wing since the silence began. 14 had requested reassignment within the first week. 6 more had followed in the second. The remaining 3 had submitted their final petitions yesterday, each one phrased with the careful diplomatic language the Tessaran court required: respectful, regretful, and absolutely unwilling to remain in a wing where a child sat at a table 3 times a day and stared at food he would not eat, in rooms where every attempt at conversation met a gaze that looked through the speaker as if they were glass. 31 attendants in total, counting the original 8 who had served the prince before the silence, every one of them credentialed, trained, vetted through the sovereign household's rigorous selection process. Linguists, child development specialists, a therapeutic harmonist who claimed to read emotional states through subvocal vibrations, a retired military educator who had raised 4 generations of officer cadets and assured the sovereign that discipline and structure would reach any child, a woman from the Varanthi diplomatic corps whose specialty was nonverbal communication with precontact species. All of them gone. The prince's wing stood empty of staff as of this morning, and Valrin was here because empty wings were his problem. He had read every one of their exit reports. The therapeutic harmonist had written 4 pages about resistant effective closure patterns and concluded that the prince required immersive harmonic realignment therapy, a treatment that existed in the theoretical literature but had never been successfully applied to a living patient. The military educator had been more direct. The child has weaponized passivity. My methods require a minimum of bilateral engagement. I cannot educate a wall. The Varanthi diplomat, whose career had been built on establishing communication with species that had no shared language with any known civilization, had submitted the shortest report of all. He is choosing silence. I have no training for choice. Valrin had filed each report in the appropriate tracking system and watched the numbers change on his staffing dashboard, assigned staff dropping, vacancy percentage climbing, the prince's wing transitioning from staffed to critical to the blinking red designation that meant empty, no reassignment pending. The system was doing what systems do when they encounter a problem they cannot process: escalating, flagging, requesting intervention. But the intervention it requested was more staff, and more staff was precisely what had failed. He was an administrator, not a counselor, not a physician, not a child development expert. He managed staffing, logistics, procurement, and the 1,000 small systems that kept a palace running: the schedules, the supplies, the maintenance contracts, the labor exchanges that brought workers from a dozen species to fill the positions the Tessaran aristocracy considered beneath their attention. He was good at it. He understood systems the way an engineer understands circuits: inputs, outputs, failure points, redundancies. What he did not understand was silence, or children, or the particular quality of grief that had settled over the prince's wing like dust over furniture nobody used. But empty wings were his problem, and so here he was. He pressed his palm to the crystal doors. They read his clearance and opened with a whisper of pneumatic precision. The prince's receiving chamber spread before him, high-ceilinged, crystal-paneled, flooded with the cool blue light of Tessara's twin moons that poured through floor-to-ceiling viewports. Beautiful, cold, the kind of room designed to impress delegations, not comfort children. Prince Caliph sat at the long table in the center of the room. He was small for 11 cycles, fine-boned, with the pale ice-blue skin and faintly luminous silver hair that marked the Tesseran royal line. His eyes, large and faceted in the way of his species, caught the moonlight and refracted it into shades of violet. He wore a formal receiving robe 3 sizes too large for him, as though someone had dressed him in his father's expectations. A meal sat before him on the table, 17 individual dishes arranged on a crystal service tray, each one prepared by the palace kitchen according to the sovereign household's nutritional protocols. Every dish was untouched. Every dish had been untouched at every meal for 41 days. The boy was not starving. The physicians had confirmed that Tesseran juveniles could sustain themselves on ambient harmonic energy for extended periods, drawing nutrition from the palace's resonance fields the way a plant draws from sunlight. But harmonic sustenance was survival, not living. The physicians' reports noted declining body mass, reduced neural activity, and what they carefully termed affective withdrawal. The boy was alive. He was not thriving. Valrin stood in the doorway and felt the weight of the silence. It was not merely the absence of speech. It was the absence of a child being a child, no restlessness, no fidgeting, no small movements of curiosity or boredom. The prince sat as though he had been placed there by someone who had forgotten to come back. "Your Highness," Valrin said, "I am administrator, so I manage the household staffing for the upper palace levels." The boy's eyes moved to him, through him, past him. Valrin had managed staffing for 32 years. He had worked with Tesseran aristocrats who considered him furniture, with visiting dignitaries who considered him invisible, with military officers who considered him a necessary inconvenience. He was accustomed to being looked through. But the prince's gaze was different. It was not dismissal. It was exhaustion. The look of someone who had been talked at by 31 different experts and had learned that the only power he possessed was the power to refuse to respond. Valrin inclined his head, left, walked back to his office on the administrative level and sat at his desk and thought. The staffing report glowed on his data glass. 31 attendants all failed. The sovereign had expressed displeasure. The court physicians had escalated their concern. The harmonist faction had petitioned for intervention. Everyone had an opinion about what the prince needed. Nobody had asked the prince, because the prince would not answer, and because asking a child what he needed was not, in the Tesseran court's long and protocol-bound tradition, something one did. Children were provided for. Their needs were anticipated by experts and fulfilled by staff. The system worked for every child it had ever been applied to, which meant that, when it failed, the system's response was to apply more of itself, more experts, more protocols, more attendants, rather than to question whether the system was the problem. Valrin understood systems. He also understood, after 32 years of keeping them running, that every system had a gap, a space between what the system could see and what actually needed to happen. His job was usually to fill those gaps with logistics. Today the gap was shaped like a boy who would not eat. He pulled up the labor exchange roster. The palace employed 47 exchange workers, humans, mostly, with a scattering of Delvari and Onthan assigned to maintenance, sanitation, and kitchen duties. The positions the court didn't think about. The people the court didn't see. Valrin saw them because they appeared in his staffing reports as line items, contract durations, performance metrics, incident logs. Numbers, not faces. One name caught his attention. Marin Call, human, female, age 57, kitchen auxiliary sublevel 3, contract duration 9 years, performance rating consistently above standard, incident log empty, special notes none. 9 years and not a single note. In Valrin's experience, that meant one of two things. Either the worker was so unremarkable that nobody had ever had reason to comment, or the worker was so consistently competent that competence had become invisible. He pulled her assignment history. 9 years of kitchen shifts. Early arrivals logged but never officially noted. meal preparation metrics that exceeded quota by 15 to 20% without any corresponding overtime claims. 3 commendations from the head kitchen supervisor, all phrased identically. Reliable, no issues. The bureaucratic equivalent of a shrug. But there was something else. A pattern in the food waste reports that Valrin noticed because food waste was a line item in his procurement budget, and procurement was something he watched closely. Sublevel 3's kitchen had been running below average food waste for 9 years. Not dramatically below. Just steadily, consistently, a few percentage points less than every other kitchen on every other sublevel. The kind of difference nobody would flag because it was always in the right direction. Less waste meant less cost. Nobody investigated efficiency. Valrin investigated efficiency. He pulled the sublevel 3 kitchen's output logs and cross-referenced them with Marin Kahl's shift schedule. On her shifts, food waste dropped. On her days off, it returned to normal. For 9 years, one kitchen worker had been reducing waste by cooking food that people actually ate, a distinction so basic it sounded like it should not need stating. And yet the palace kitchens operated on nutritional protocol menus designed by dietetic specialists who optimized for nutrient density, not for whether anyone wanted to eat the result. He sat with this for a moment. He pulled her background file, the labor exchange intake record that every human worker submitted upon placement. Most of the intake files he'd processed over the years were thin. Name, age, species, homeworld, prior employment summary, health clearance, duration of contract. Marin Kahl's was thin too. But the prior employment section contained a single line that made him pause. 26 years food service, various postings. Various postings. The bureaucratic catch, all for a career that had moved too many times to list. He checked the exchange agency's supplemental records. Meridian Orbital Platform, 3 years. Outpost Karath, 4 years, a frontier station where the food situation had been, according to the historical logs, catastrophic until a staffing change improved morale ratings by 30%. Delvery Trade Vessel Ansoth, 7 years, the longest single posting, on a ship whose crew had petitioned the exchange agency to extend her contract twice. Each posting ended when the posting ended, not when she chose to leave. Contracts expired, stations closed, ships decommissioned. She'd been moved by the system's indifference the way a current moves a leaf, without malice, without attention, without any awareness that what it was moving had roots. 26 years of cooking for people who never knew her name. 9 more here, on Tessara, in a kitchen where her competence expressed itself as a statistical anomaly in a food waste report that nobody read. He stood up and walked to sublevel 3. The kitchen was industrial. Long stainless counters, automated prep stations, ventilation hoods humming with extraction fans, the smell of steam and recycled air, and something underneath warm, rounded, faintly spiced that Valrin could not identify, but that made the back of his mind think of a word he had no Tesseran equivalent for. The nearest translation might have been comfort, but the Tesseran concept of comfort was architectural proper temperature, proper light, proper harmonic balance. This was something else. This was a smell that made a room feel inhabited. Marin Kahl was at the far end of the kitchen, standing at a manual prep station, not the automated ones that did the measuring and cutting, but a wooden cutting board with a knife, the kind of setup that belonged in a previous century. She was short, broad-shouldered, with gray-streaked dark hair pulled back under a kitchen cap and hands that moved with the particular unhurried precision of someone who had done the same task 10,000 times. She was cutting root vegetables, not the nutrient-optimized Tesseran tubers that the protocol specified, but something she had apparently brought in herself, a knobbed, irregular thing with brown skin and yellow flesh that smelled, when she cut it, of earth and sweetness. She looked up when he entered. Steady gaze. No deference, no alarm, no performance of busyness. The look of someone who was where they were supposed to be, doing what they were supposed to do, and who would continue doing it whether or not an administrator was watching. Marin call. That's me. I'm administrator, so I manage household staffing. I know who you are. She went back to cutting. The kitchen requisition for thermal seal replacements went through your office 8 weeks ago. Still waiting. He noted this. I'll look into it. Appreciate that. She arranged the cut vegetables in a heavy-bottomed pot, not one of the kitchen's standard-issue automated cookers, but a cast metal vessel she kept on a lower shelf, worn from use, the handle wrapped in heat-resistant tape where the original grip had worn through. She added water from the tap, a measured pour that she gauged by sound rather than by the digital fill line the automated systems used. Then a handful of dried herbs from a cloth pouch she kept in her apron pocket. Then salt, coarse, granular, pinched between her fingers and dropped from a height that let her see the scatter pattern. What are you making? Broth. That's not on the protocol menu. No. The protocol menu is designed by the sovereign household's dietary specialists. I know. She set the pot on the heating element and adjusted the temperature by hand, not the digital dial, but the manual override underneath it, a physical knob that gave her finer control. I make the protocol menu. Every shift, everything on the list, measured and timed and documented. Then I make this. For whom? For whoever's hungry. Valrin watched her for a long moment. The broth began to heat. The smell intensified deeper now, layered, the vegetables releasing their sugars as the water warmed, the herbs contributing something sharp and green that cut through the sweetness like a voice cutting through a crowd. The prince's wing is empty, he said. Every assigned attendant has resigned or requested transfer. I heard. The prince does not eat 41 days. She paused, not the pause of surprise, the pause of someone measuring what to say. The palace food is nutritionally perfect, she said. I've seen the protocols, every micronutrient accounted for, every caloric value optimized, every texture and temperature specified to the fraction. It's flawless. But nobody eats flawless food because it's flawless. People eat food because it smells like something. Because it's warm and it came from a person's hands, and it sits in a bowl instead of on a crystal service tray with 17 separate compartments. The food on that tray isn't a meal. It's an assignment. You've seen the prince's tray. I prepare the prince's tray. Every morning, every midday, every evening. My station handles the upper-level service. I plate it, I send it up, and it comes back untouched. For 41 days, I've been sending perfect food to a child who won't eat it, and for 41 days, I've been scraping it into the waste bin and thinking about what I'd make instead if anyone asked. I'm asking. She looked at him. Something shifted in her expression, not hope, exactly, but the guarded attention of someone who had stopped expecting to be heard and was recalibrating. A bowl of broth, she said. Just broth, warm, in a simple bowl, not a crystal tray, no protocol, no 17 dishes. One bowl, one spoon, and someone who sits with him while it cools. That's not a dietary intervention, that's a meal. Yes. Valrin stood in the kitchen and thought about the gap between systems and people. He thought about the 31 attendants who had been selected for their expertise and had failed because expertise, it turned out, could not reach a child who had decided that the world was made of experts who talked at him and never stayed. He thought about a cook who had been sending up perfect food and scraping it back untreated for 41 days, and had spent those 41 days thinking about what she would do differently. Come with me, he said. She wiped her hands on her apron, took the pot off the heat, it wasn't ready yet, covered it, set a timer, untied the apron and folded it on the counter with the careful neatness of someone who respected their workspace. Then she followed him through the service corridors, up the staff lift, through 3 security checkpoints where guards looked at her kitchen uniform and looked at Valrin's administrative clearance and decided the combination was above their pay grade. The prince's wing was quiet. The light had shifted, first moon setting, second moon rising, the blue taking on a violet edge that softened the crystal walls. The receiving chamber's doors were still open from Vaelrin's earlier visit. Inside, Prince Caliph sat exactly where he had been. The 17 dishes sat exactly as they had been. Nothing had moved. Marinkal stopped in the doorway. Vaelrin watched her face. He expected what? Pity. Alarm. The professional assessment he'd seen on 31 other faces before they'd entered this room and begun their careful, credentialed, ultimately futile attempts to reach a silent child. What he saw instead was recognition, not the recognition of a specialist identifying a syndrome, the recognition of a person seeing another person. Her eyes took in the boy's smallness, the too large robe, the untouched food. The stillness, and her face did something that Vaelrin, in 32 years of reading faces across species and rank, had rarely seen directed at a member of the Tessaran royal family. She looked at him the way she'd look at anyone who was sitting alone and hadn't eaten. "That's a lot of food for one boy," she said, addressing the room but not demanding that the boy respond. He didn't respond, but his eyes moved to her, not through her, to her. The small distinction that Vaelrin noticed because he had been trained by 3 decades of being looked through to recognize when someone was actually being seen. Marin walked to the table, not to the prince, to the tray. She looked at the 17 dishes with the assessing eye of a cook examining another cook's work. She picked up a dish, smelled it, set it down, picked up another. Her expression was not critical, it was patient. The patience of someone who understood food well enough to see both its perfection and its failure. "This is excellent work," she said. "Whoever designed this menu knows their nutrition, every element balanced, beautiful presentation." She set the last dish down. "But it's not food, it's a report on food. It tells you everything about what's in it and nothing about why you'd want to eat it." The prince's eyes had not left her. "I'm going to go make you something," she said. "It won't be on any protocol, it won't have 17 dishes. It'll be a bowl of broth, warm. It'll taste like someone made it for you specifically, not for a nutrient profile. I'll bring it back when it's ready, and if you don't want it, that's fine. It'll keep." She turned and walked out. No farewell, no therapeutic phrasing. "No, I understand what you're going through," or "we're here for you," or any of the careful language the 31 attendants had deployed. She'd stated what she was going to do and left. Vaelrin followed her back to the kitchen. She relit the burner under the pot and resumed her prep as if she'd never left. "What just happened?" he asked. "I told him what I was going to do, didn't ask him to do anything, didn't ask him to talk, didn't make it about him, made it about the food. The previous attendants were there for him, I'm there for the food. He can take it or leave it. The food doesn't care whether he speaks." She adjusted the flame. "Everyone who walks into that room walks in looking at him. He's been looked at for 41 days. Looked at, assessed, measured, diagnosed, approached, retreated from. I'm not going to look at him. I'm going to look at the food. He can look at me if he wants." Vaelrin sat down on a supply crate near the kitchen entrance. He did not normally sit in kitchens. He did not normally watch workers cook. But something was happening here that his system-trained mind recognized as a process, a sequence of steps, a logic, a methodology, even though it looked nothing like the processes he was accustomed to managing. The broth took 40 minutes. Marin worked in silence, adjusting heat, skimming, tasting with a wooden spoon she kept in her apron pocket, worn smooth from years of use, the handle darkened with absorbed oils. She added things in small quantities, a piece of dried root that smelled like pepper and caramel, a splash of something from a small bottle she kept on her personal shelf, a single leaf from a plant she grew in a pot on the kitchen windowsill, the only living thing in the industrial kitchen, a small green rebellion against the sterile protocol. The smell filled the kitchen, not the clean, neutral smell of the protocol menu, which was designed to be inoffensive to every species' olfactory range. This smelled specific. This smelled like it came from a particular place, a particular tradition, a particular person's hands. It smelled, Valerin thought, like the idea of a kitchen that was not this kitchen, a smaller room, a lower ceiling, a window that looked out onto something other than service corridors. She ladled the broth into a simple ceramic bowl, not crystal, not protocol-approved dinnerware, but a bowl she produced from a lower cabinet where she kept her personal equipment. Cream-colored, chipped at the rim, the kind of bowl that had been used enough to show it. "That bowl is not from the palace inventory," Valerin said. "No, I brought it from home 9 years ago." She set a plain spoon beside it. "Metal, not crystal. A boy won't eat from a museum piece. He'll eat from a bowl that looks like someone uses it." She carried the bowl herself, through the service corridors, up the lift, past the checkpoints. Valerin followed at a distance, close enough to observe but far enough that his presence didn't frame this as an official action. He positioned himself at the corridor junction where he could see through the receiving chamber's open doors without being in the room. Marin walked in, set the bowl on the table, not in front of the prince, beside him, to his left, the way you'd set a cup of tea next to someone who was working and might reach for it when they were ready. "Broth," she said. "It's hot, give it a minute." Then she sat down, not across from him, not at the head of the table where the attendants had positioned themselves to maintain therapeutic distance. She sat one chair to his left, angled away, looking toward the viewport and the violet moonlight that poured through the crystal. She did not speak. She did not look at him. She looked out the viewport as if the view was interesting enough to sit with, and the boy was beside her the way another person is beside you on a bench, present, parallel, not demanding. Valerin watched from the corridor. Minutes passed. The steam from the bowl rose and curled and thinned. The smell reached Valerin even at his distance, warm, grounded, layered with the sweetness of the root vegetables and the sharpness of the herbs, and something underneath that he could only describe as patience. The smell of something that had been cooked slowly by someone who believed that time was an ingredient. 5 minutes, the prince's hand moved. It was small, a lateral shift, the left hand sliding along the table's surface toward the bowl, the movement so tentative it could have been accidental. Valerin held his breath. In 32 years of administrative work, he had never held his breath over a staffing outcome. But this was not a staffing outcome. This was a boy reaching for a bowl of soup. The prince's fingers touched the bowl's rim, the chipped rim. His fingertips rested there, feeling the ceramic's warmth. Marin did not look. She continued watching the viewport, her breathing steady, her posture the posture of a person who was exactly where she wanted to be and had nowhere else to go. The prince picked up the spoon. Valerin felt something shift in his chest, a feeling he had no administrative category for, something that lived in the space between relief and awe, the feeling of watching a system's gap close, not through better protocols or additional expertise, but through a bowl of broth and the presence of a person who did not need the boy to perform recovery for her benefit. The prince ate. Not much, 3 spoonfuls, 4, each one taken with the slow deliberation of someone relearning a skill they'd set aside. The broth steamed as it traveled from bowl to mouth, and the boy's face changed, not dramatically, not the therapeutic breakthrough the specialists would have documented, but a softening, a fractional easing around the eyes, the look of someone whose body had been reminded of something it had forgotten it wanted. Marin sat beside him and said nothing. After the 4th spoonful, the prince set the spoon down. He looked at the bowl. He looked at the viewport. He looked at Marin's profile, the gray-streaked hair, the kitchen cap, the weathered hands resting on the table. She was not beautiful by Tessaran standards, not luminous, not ethereal. She was a 57-year-old human woman in a kitchen uniform who smelled like broth and herbs and work. The boy's mouth opened. "It's warm," he said. 2 words. The first 2 words Prince Caliph of the Tesseran sovereignty had spoken in 41 days. They were not addressed to an expert. They were not a therapeutic milestone. They were an observation about soup, spoken to a cook, in a tone that was small and rough from disuse and entirely, simply human in its need to state something true to someone who would hear it. Should be, Marin said. That's the point of broth. Valrin pressed his back against the corridor wall and closed his eyes. He stayed there for a long time. Over the next 3 days, Valrin did something he had never done in his administrative career. He observed a process he had not designed. Marin came to the prince's wing 3 times a day. She brought broth the first day, the same broth, reheated, carried in the same chipped bowl. The second day she brought a different preparation, a thick grain porridge sweetened with dried fruit that she'd reconstituted in warm water overnight, served in the same bowl with the same metal spoon. The third day she brought flatbread made from scratch in the sub-level 3 kitchen, baked on a flat stone she kept under her prep station, torn into pieces, and served with a small dish of herbed oil for dipping. Each time she set the food beside the prince, sat 1 chair to his left and looked out the viewport. She did not ask him to eat. She did not ask him to talk. She did not monitor his intake or document his responses. She sat with him the way one person sits with another, when both of them have decided that the silence between them is acceptable, and the food is there when they want it. Valrin catalogued the differences between Marin's visits and the attendants' visits the way he catalogued supply chain inefficiencies, methodically, looking for the variable that explained the outcome. The attendants had arrived on schedule, stayed for a prescribed duration, followed a documented approach. They had been trained to establish rapport, to read behavioral cues, to deploy conversational strategies calibrated for the prince's developmental stage and emotional profile. Each one had entered the room with a plan, and had left the room with the plan intact and the boy untouched. Marin arrived whenever the food was ready. Sometimes that was on the hour. Sometimes it was 20 minutes late because the broth needed more time, because the grain needed more soaking, because the flatbread wasn't right yet, and she would not bring food she wasn't satisfied with to anyone, prince or porter. She stayed until the food was gone or cold, whichever came first. She had no plan. She had a bowl. The court physician sent Valrin a formal inquiry on the second day. We have noted unauthorized food deliveries to the prince's residential wing. Please confirm the source and provide documentation of nutritional content, allergen screening, and therapeutic intent. Valrin responded, Supplemental Nutritional Service, authorized under Administrative Operations Code 74. Documentation will follow. He did not specify when it would follow. The physicians, who were busy preparing an emergency report for the sovereign on the prince's continued withdrawal, filed his response and moved on. On the third evening, Valrin sat in his office and stared at the staffing dashboard. The prince's wing still glowed red, officially unstaffed, but the vacancy no longer felt like a failure. It felt like a clearing. The space where 31 people had stood and accomplished nothing was now the space where one person sat with a bowl and accomplished everything. The prince ate, not every time, not every dish, but he ate. 4 spoonfuls the first day, 6 the second. On the third day he ate half the flatbread and dipped 3 pieces in the herbed oil, and Valrin, watching from the corridor, saw the boy's shoulders drop a 1/4 inch, the tension releasing from muscles that had been clenched for 6 weeks. Valrin began documenting, not in the formal therapeutic outcome format the court physicians used, but in his own administrative shorthand, the shorthand he developed over 3 decades for tracking processes that didn't fit neatly into reporting categories. He noted arrival times, food type, duration of visit, observable behavioral indicators. He noted that Marin's visits lasted between 15 and 40 minutes. He noted that she never stayed longer than the food was warm. He noted that she brought the bowl back to the kitchen herself, washed it by hand, not in the automated cleaning unit but at the manual sink, with a cloth and hot water, and set it on her personal shelf to dry. On the fourth day, the prince spoke again. Valrin was at his usual station in the corridor, data glass in hand, pretending to review procurement reports while his actual attention was on the receiving chamber. He had reorganized his own schedule around Marin's visits morning, midday, evening, though he would not have admitted this to anyone, least of all himself. An administrator did not rearrange his workday around a cook's delivery schedule, but an administrator who was watching something he had never seen before, a process that worked despite having no documentation, no methodology, no theoretical basis, was permitted a certain professional curiosity. What's in it? Marin was setting down a bowl of something that smelled like roasted roots and cream. Telera tubers, the ones from the lower market, not the hydroponic ones. They're uglier, but they taste like something. Orange cream, salt, a little of the dried bark I keep in my pocket. The bark? Earth thing. Well, it started as an earth thing. My mother used it. I found something similar growing in the station's arboretum 6 years ago. Not the same, but close enough. Tastes like the memory of the thing rather than the thing itself. The prince considered this. Memories taste different from the real thing. Always, better usually. The real thing is just food. The memory is the food plus the person who made it plus the place you ate it plus whoever was sitting beside you. Brains add flavor that kitchens can't. The prince looked at his bowl. The food they send me doesn't have memories. No, it has nutrients, different department. Valrin in the corridor wrote this down. He had started keeping his own log, not the formal administrative records, but a separate file on his personal data glass, password protected, labeled with the innocuous file name Procurement Notes Q4. He recorded the prince's words verbatim, the timestamp, the food served, the duration of the visit. He did not know why. Administrators did not keep personal logs of staffing outcomes, but this was not a staffing outcome, and these notes were not administrative. They were the record of something he was witnessing that the system had no category for, and the absence of a category did not mean the thing was not worth recording. He was building a case, though he didn't yet know for what. His administrative mind recognized a pattern, an intervention that was working, applied by an unaccredited worker, using methods that existed nowhere in the court's protocols. He needed to protect it, because the moment the court physicians learned that a kitchen auxiliary was achieving results their specialists had failed to produce, the system would reassert itself. They would demand documentation, therapeutic framing, oversight. They would process Marin Call through the credentialing apparatus, and either formalize her into something she wasn't or remove her for lacking the credentials to be what she was. He began quietly adjusting her assignment schedule. A kitchen auxiliary's duties did not include upper-level service delivery, but Valrin's authority over staffing logistics was broad enough to reassign workers within reasonable operational parameters. He created a new assignment code, Supplemental Nutritional Service, Upper Residential, and attached Marin's employee number to it. He routed the assignment through his own office rather than through the kitchen supervisors, which meant it appeared in the system as an administrative action rather than a kitchen duty. Invisible, the way the best fixes always were. On the 5th day, Valrin was reviewing the morning's interdepartmental communications when a message arrived from the court physician's office. The chief physician, a Tessaran woman named Rethales, whose reputation for thoroughness was matched only by her reputation for territorial defensiveness, had discovered the Supplemental Nutritional Service in Valrin's operations log. Administrator, so the prince's dietary needs are under the purview of the sovereign medical authority. Any modification to his nutritional regimen requires prior approval through channels that include, at minimum, a qualified dietary physician, a harmonic compatibility analyst, and a review board. Your operations code does not authorize food service to royal residential zones without medical clearance. Please suspend the unauthorized deliveries and report to my office at your earliest convenience. Valrin read the message twice. Then he pulled up the prince's medical file, the portions accessible to his administrative clearance, and noted the most recent entry, day 44. Patient continues to refuse all offered nutrition. Harmonic sustenance adequate for basal metabolic function. Effective withdrawal unchanged. Recommend escalation to Sovereign Medical Council for consideration of involuntary nutritional support. Involuntary nutritional support, the medical term for force-feeding a child. He walked to Dr. Rithales' office. She was seated behind a desk covered in crystal data tablets, her pale lavender features arranged in the expression Valrin recognized as professional displeasure. The prince has eaten solid food for 4 consecutive days, he said before she could speak. He has spoken twice. His neural activity readings, which your monitoring systems record automatically, will show a measurable improvement beginning approximately 48 hours ago. I will forward the operational documentation for the supplemental service when the current trial period concludes. In the interim, I respectfully note that the alternative your office proposed was involuntary nutritional support for an 11-year-old boy. Rithales stared at him. The service will continue, he said. If you have concerns, I suggest you review the monitoring data. He left before she could respond. In 32 years, he had never walked out of a physician's office. But in 32 years, he had never had a reason that mattered as much as a boy eating soup. On the 7th day, the prince was sitting on the floor when Marin arrived. Not at the table. On the floor, cross-legged beside the viewport, in a patch of moonlight that made his ice-blue skin glow faintly from within. He looked up when she entered, and his face did something Valrin had never seen it do. It expected her. Marin set the bowl on the floor beside him, sat on the floor herself, one hand on the viewport frame for balance, her knees protesting audibly. "Getting old for floor sitting," she said. The prince almost smiled. Not quite. The muscles around his mouth shifted toward the configuration but didn't complete it, like a word started and swallowed. But the intention was there, and the intention was the thing. "You come every day," he said. 3 times. "Why?" "Because you're hungry. The physicians say I'm sustained by the palace harmonics." "The physicians are right about your body. I'm talking about the other kind of hungry." The prince looked at her. What other kind? Marin dipped a piece of flatbread in the broth and ate it herself. Not a therapeutic gesture. A hungry woman eating her own cooking. The kind where you sit in a room and 17 dishes come in on a crystal tray, and they're all perfect, and none of them were made by anyone who knows your name. The kind where the food arrives and it's correct and it's complete and it's nothing, like being handed a letter addressed to occupant. "Nobody calls me by my name." "What's your name?" "Caliph." "Caliph, mine's Marin. Are you going to eat that or should I?" He ate it. On the 8th day, the head kitchen supervisor, a Tessaran functionary named Solith, who managed the sub-level 3 kitchen with the rigid efficiency of a man, who believed that variance was the enemy of quality, appeared in Valrin's office doorway. "Administrator, I need to discuss Marin Call's performance metrics." "Sit down." Solith sat. His posture communicated displeasure with the same precision his kitchen communicated nutrient profiles. Call has been leaving her station during shift hours, 3 times daily. Her output metrics are being affected. "Are they below standard?" "They are at standard, but they were previously above standard. The differential represents a decline. From above standard to at standard." "Correct." "Solith, her standard level output exceeds that of every other kitchen auxiliary on every other sublevel. Her waste reduction alone saves this palace more in annual procurement costs than your entire kitchen's overtime budget. She is performing at a level that would be exceptional for any worker, and is merely meeting the bar she set for herself over 9 years of invisible excellence. The fact that she is doing this while also performing supplemental duties that I have authorized should be a matter of commendation, not complaint. Solith opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again. I was not informed of supplemental duties. You are now informed. Is there anything else? There was not. Valrin sat alone in his office after Solith left and realized that he had just defended a kitchen worker's schedule with more passion than he had brought to any administrative dispute in 3 decades. He was not sure when he had stopped observing and started protecting. He was not sure it mattered. Valrin reported to the Sovereign on the 10th day. Sovereign Thessalis was a tall, composed figure whose ice-blue skin was darker than his son's, weathered by duty the way a mountain is weathered by wind present, immovable, eroded only at the edges. His office occupied the highest level of the palace, a room of crystal and silver where every surface caught the light and threw it back multiplied. The prince has eaten solid food for 7 consecutive days, Valrin said. He has spoken on 4 separate occasions. The therapeutic monitoring team has noted improved neural activity and a reversal of the effective withdrawal pattern. Which attendant achieved this? A kitchen auxiliary, human. Her name is Marin Call. She has been bringing the prince meals she prepares herself, not protocol meals, personal preparations. She sits with him while he eats. She does not engage therapeutically. She engages as a cook who has brought food to a person who is hungry. Sovereign Thessalis was quiet for a long moment. The kind of quiet that Valrin, after 32 years of delivering administrative reports to powerful people, recognized as the silence of someone recalculating assumptions. A cook. Yes, your sovereignty. 31 attendants, linguists, child specialists, therapeutic harmonists, the most credentialed individuals available to the court failed. A cook succeeded. With a bowl of broth, yes. What is your assessment? Valrin considered the question carefully. He was an administrator. His assessments were supposed to be operational staffing efficiency, resource allocation, process improvement. But the question was not operational. The sovereign was asking something that lived in the gap between what the system could see and what actually mattered. My assessment is that the prince was not failing to respond to treatment. The prince was responding to what was being offered. What was being offered was expertise directed at him. What Marin Call offers is food directed at a person. The distinction is whether the interaction is built around the worker's skill or around the person being served. Every attendant entered that room with a methodology. Call enters with a bowl. And the bowl works. The bowl works because it isn't trying to work. It's just food. Warm food in a simple bowl brought by a person who sits beside him and doesn't require him to demonstrate progress. Sovereign Thessalis stood and walked to the viewport. Below, the palace's lower terraces spread in tiers of crystal and garden, the blue-violet flora catching the moonlight. Valrin could see the arboretum where Marin had found the bark that tasted like a memory. I want to see this, the sovereign said. Without being seen. Valrin arranged it for the evening meal. The sovereign stood in the corridor where Valrin had stood for 10 days, positioned at the junction where the receiving chamber's doors provided a clear sightline without revealing the observer. Valrin stood beside him, watching the sovereign's face the way he'd been watching Marin's process carefully, completely, reading the data. Marin arrived with the evening meal. Tonight it was a stew rich, dark, thick with root vegetables and grain and something slow-cooked that filled the corridor with a warmth that made even the crystal walls seem less cold. She carried the chipped bowl in one hand, a piece of flatbread balanced on top, and a second bowl smaller for herself. She sat on the floor beside the prince. He was waiting for her. His posture had changed over the days, still quiet, still contained, but the containment was no longer rigid. It was comfortable. the stillness of someone who was at rest, not frozen. "Stew tonight," she said. "Heavy, you'll sleep well." "What's in it?" "Everything. That's the rule of stew. It's the meal you make when you don't want to choose. You put in whatever you have and you let the pot decide." "The pot decides." "The heat and the time decide. You just provide the ingredients and the patience. Same as most things worth doing." The prince ate, slowly, carefully, tasting each spoonful as though the act of tasting was something he was relearning. Marin ate her own portion beside him, and the sound of two people eating quietly together filled the room with a warmth that had nothing to do with temperature. "Marin." The other people who came, the attendants, they always asked me questions. "I know." They asked me how I was feeling, what I was thinking, whether I wanted to talk about my mother. Marin's spoon paused. She did not look at him. She looked at her bowl. "Did you want to talk about your mother?" "No, she's gone. Talking about her to strangers doesn't bring her back. It just makes me perform missing her for people who need to see it so they can write it in a report." "Then don't." They said I had to. Nobody has to talk about anything they're not ready to talk about. Grief doesn't work on a schedule. It works on its own time, like stew. You put the feelings in and you let them simmer, and eventually they become something you can carry. But you don't get to rush it, and nobody else gets to tell you when it's done. Valrin watched the sovereign's face. The Tesseran expression set was different from a human's. The emotions registered in the faceted eyes, in the geometric tension of the jaw, in the barely perceptible luminescence that shifted across the skin. What Valrin read there was not displeasure, not assessment, not the sovereign's practiced composure. It was the expression of a father watching someone feed his child, and the expression carried the weight of a man who had provided everything protocol demanded, and had not known that what his son needed was a bowl of stew and a person who would sit on the floor. The sovereign's hand, pressed against the corridor wall, trembled, once, then steadied. Valrin looked away. There were things an administrator should not witness, moments that belonged to the private geography of a father's heart, not to the operational record. He studied the crystal wall, the geometric light patterns, the way the corridor's ambient illumination shifted as the second moon climbed. He gave the sovereign the space that dignity required. When the sovereign spoke again, his voice had changed. The formal register, the one Valrin had heard in 32 years of briefings and directives and official pronouncements, was gone. What remained was quieter, rougher, stripped down to the structure underneath the polish. His mother used to cook for him. Valrin said nothing. Not the protocol meals. The sovereign consort did not cook protocol meals. She cooked, what did she call it, improvised. She would go to the kitchen on sublevel 3, your sublevel 3, the exchange worker's kitchen, because the formal kitchen would not allow modifications to the menu, and she would make things. Small things. A grain pudding with dried fruit, a flatbread with oil and herbs. She brought them to him in the evening, and they sat together, and she told him about the ingredients. Where they came from, how they grew. He loved it. It was the only time he ate willingly. When the consort died, I replaced the evening visits with the protocol menu. 17 dishes, crystal tray, prepared by the dietary specialists, nutritionally optimal. I believed the system would be sufficient. I believed the nutrition was the point. The sovereign's voice held the particular flatness of a man who has arrived at a conclusion he cannot unmake. The nutrition was never the point. The point was his mother sitting beside him. Valrin understood then what Marin Kahl had done without knowing she had done it. She had not healed the prince. She had not fixed him. She had filled a shape, the shape a mother's presence leaves in a child's life when it is removed, not by being the mother, by being a person who did what the mother had done, brought food made by hand, sat beside him and asked nothing. Administrator, so. Your sovereignty. What would it take to ensure that this woman remains assigned to my son's wing? A permanent reassignment from kitchen auxiliary to household staff, upper residential. A reclassification of her labor exchange contract from general service to specialized service. Quarters on an upper sublevel, closer to the prince's wing. An adjustment to her compensation. Do all of it. She may not accept. The sovereign looked at him. She may prefer to remain in the kitchen, Valrin said. She may prefer the work she chose. Reassigning her to the prince's wing changes what she does from something she offers freely to something she is required to do. The distinction matters. A bowl of broth brought by choice is different from a bowl of broth brought by assignment. The sovereign was quiet for a long time. When he spoke, his voice was lower than Valrin had ever heard it. Then ask her what she wants. Valrin asked her the next morning, in the sublevel 3 kitchen, while she was making broth. The sovereign wants to formalize your visits to the prince. Reassignment, reclassification, new quarters, increased compensation. Marin stirred the pot. The wooden spoon circled slowly, the broth turning in patterns that caught the overhead light. No. You're declining. I'm declining the formalization, not the visits. She tasted the broth, added a pinch of something from the cloth pouch. The moment you put me in a uniform and give me a title and assign me to his wing, I become the 32nd attendant. Another person sent to fix him. Another expert. Doesn't matter that I'm not the boy will see the uniform and the official quarters and the assignment code, and he'll know that I'm there because someone told me to be, not because I chose to be. So you want to continue as you are. I want to keep making food in this kitchen. I want to keep carrying it upstairs 3 times a day. I want to keep sitting on the floor with him while we eat. I don't need a title for that. I don't need quarters for that. I need the kitchen, the ingredients, the bowl, and the time. That's all I've ever needed. Valrin reported this to the sovereign. The sovereign did not argue. Instead, he issued a single administrative directive. Marin Call's kitchen assignment was to be maintained without modification. Her access to the upper residential levels was to be unrestricted. Her personal kitchen equipment, the cast metal pot, the chipped bowl, the wooden spoon, the cloth pouch of herbs, the flat stone, the plan on the windowsill was to be listed as essential operational equipment, not subject to standardization or replacement. Her procurement requests for non-protocol ingredients were to be approved without review. The directive was filed under Valrin's authority. No fanfare, no ceremony. No title, no medal, no formal recognition. Just a quiet expansion of permissions, a few lines of administrative code that made the gap in the system official without making it visible. On the 12th day, something small happened that Valrin almost missed. He was walking through the sublevel 3 corridor on his way to a procurement meeting when he passed the kitchen entrance and heard a sound that stopped him. Laughter. Not adult laughter, the lighter, more uncertain sound of a child laughing, as though the muscles involved had been out of practice and were remembering how to work. He stepped to the kitchen doorway. The prince was inside. He was sitting on the counter beside Marin's prep station, a counter that was not designed for sitting, that was covered in flour and cut herbs and the general honest mess of a kitchen in active use, and Marin was showing him how to knead dough. His small pale hands were buried in the mixture, his fingers white with flour, his 2 large sleeves pushed back to his elbows. The flour had gotten on his face, on his silver hair, on the front of his formal robe, which he was still wearing because nobody had thought to give him anything else. Marin was not laughing. She was watching him with the steady, quiet attention of a person who understood that what was happening was fragile and could not be acknowledged too directly without breaking it. She guided his hands by demonstration, pressing, folding, turning the dough, and the boy followed, and the flour rose in small clouds between them, and the kitchen smelled like grain and warmth and the beginning of something. The prince looked up and saw Valrin in the doorway. For a moment, the boy's expression contracted the instinct of someone who had learned that being observed meant being assessed, and being assessed meant being found inadequate. But then he looked at Marin, and Marin was looking at the dough, and the boy's expression settled. He returned to kneading. Valrin walked on. The procurement meeting was waiting, but he walked slower than usual, and the sound of a child's laughter followed him down the corridor like warmth from an open doorway. On the 14th day, Valrin found the prince in the palace garden. Not the formal garden, the working garden on sublevel 2, where the arboretum's overflow grew in terraced beds tended by maintenance staff. Marin was there, kneeling in the soil, showing the boy how to transplant a seedling. Her hands were in the dirt. His hands were in the dirt. The boy's too large robe was hiked up and tucked into his belt, his bare knees pressing into the garden bed, his ice-blue skin marked with streaks of brown earth. "Gently," Marin said. "You're not placing it, you're introducing it to its new home. The roots need to feel the soil around them before they'll grip." "How do you know when they've gripped?" "You don't. You trust that they will, because that's what roots do when you give them somewhere worth growing." The prince pressed the soil around the seedling with his small fingers. He looked at Marin. "Will you come tomorrow?" "I come every day." "I know, but will you come tomorrow?" Marin sat back on her heels. 57 years old, knees aching, dirt under her fingernails, gray hair escaping her kitchen cap. She looked at the boy who had not spoken for 41 days and who now asked her the same question every child asks the person they trust. "Will you be here?" "I'll come tomorrow," she said, "and the day after that, and I'll bring something warm." The boy nodded. He went back to the seedling. Valrin stood at the edge of the garden. The light was warm here, not the cool moonlit blue of the upper levels, but the amber glow of the grow lamps, the light that fed things. He watched a cook and a prince tend a plant together, both of them with dirt on their hands, and he understood something he could not put into an administrative report. The system had produced 31 credentialed experts who could not feed one hungry boy. The gap between the system's capability and the boy's need had been filled by a woman with a wooden spoon, a chipped bowl, and the understanding that what a person needs most when they have stopped speaking is not someone who can make them talk. It is someone who will sit beside them and not require speech. Someone who brings warmth and asks nothing in return, except the chance to keep bringing it. Valrin filed no report on this. Some things belonged to the gap, and the gap did not need documentation. But something in him had shifted over these 14 days, a recalibration so gradual he only noticed it when it was already complete. He had spent 32 years managing systems, believing that the right input, properly processed, would produce the right output. Staff the position correctly, and the position would function. Fill the vacancy, and the vacancy would cease to be a problem. He had been, in his own way, as blind as the instruments that had failed the prince, sampling at intervals, recording averages, missing the thing that happened between the measurements. The thing between the measurements was Marin Kahl walking into a room with a chipped ceramic bowl and sitting down on the floor. He thought about the other exchange workers, the 46 he managed besides Marin, maintenance staff, sanitation crews, kitchen auxiliaries, grounds workers, line items on his staffing dashboard, numbers that represented contract durations and performance metrics and incident logs. He had never walked to sublevel 3 to watch any of them work. He had never pulled their background files to understand their histories. He had never sat on a supply crate in their workspaces and watched them do the thing they were good at. He wondered how many of them had a pattern in the data, a food waste reduction, a maintenance anomaly, a small consistent excellence that the system averaged away, because the system's instruments were not designed to see it. He wondered how many gaps in the palace's functioning were being quietly filled by people whose competence had become invisible because visibility required a category, and the system had no category for people who simply did what needed doing without being asked. He added a note to his personal log, the one labeled Procurement Notes Q4. Review exchange worker performance files, all 47. Look for what the system averaged away. It needed a bowl of broth, a patch of garden soil, and the quiet certainty that tomorrow, as she had said, she would come again. He walked back to his office, sat at his desk, and updated the staffing report. Line item, Marin Call Kitchen Auxiliary Sublevel 3, status, active, performance rating, exceptional, special notes, essential. He stared at the word for a moment, then he deleted it. The notes field didn't need a word, the work spoke for itself. Above him, in the prince's wing, a boy who had been silent for 41 days was telling a cook about the seedling he had planted, and the cook was listening, and the broth was cooling between them in a chipped ceramic bowl, and the palace hummed around them with the sound of a system that had, for once, made room for the thing it could not name.